Hello! Today we're going to show you how to identify and eliminate the most common cracking noises on your bike. You need to identify the component. The sound of a cracking noise is transmitted from one part to another, especially with light, large volume components such as carbon frames, so it may be difficult to determine what and where it is cracking on your bike. Try to find out what is causing the noise by carrying out specific load tests. If you test ride in a pedaling position and it cracks, it is not coming from the saddle. If you don't have your feet on the pedals and are wobbling back and forth, it won't be the pedals, cranks, or bottom bracket. Some things will quickly become clear. In more complicated cases, it can be helpful, for example, to remove parts from the bike until the noise has disappeared, for example, bottle cage and its screws. Or replace parts with ons that are guaranteed not to crack. The most common reasons for a cracking noise are too little torque, dirt, lack of dimensional accuracy, and damage. Once you have identified the source, the noise should of course go away. Here we would like to look at the most common and simplest reasons, namely insufficient torque and dirt between the components. It feels like 80% of all cracking noises on the bike come from the bottom bracket. As you have to work with a lot of force here, it may be better to mount your bike on the kickstand so that both wheels are on the ground. This way you have to bend down, but the stand and the bike won't tip over while you're working. Unfortunately, it is very likely that the bearing shells, especially on the still most common BSA housing, were installed dry by the manufacturer during assembly, or with too little grease, or simply not with the necessary torque. So the crank has to be removed. As there are many different systems, you will have to do this differently depending on the manufacturer. Let's take the widely used Shimano Holotech 2 variant as an example. First, open the clamping screws on the left crank with a 5mm Allen key. Remove the crank bolt with Shimano TLFC 16 or similar as shown above. Fold up the plastic shim, as there is still a safety device here to prevent the crank from falling off. Then pull off the crank. Then pull the right-hand crank out of the bottom bracket. You may need to help gently with a rubber mallet. Now you can see the bearing shells. Once you've got this far, I would definitely remove them briefly. If you now clean the bottom bracket shell, you can also check whether the frame has been prepared accordingly by the manufacturer. Paint noses or chips on the bottom bracket shell should be a thing of the past, but they do occur from time to time. Then grease the threads and contact surfaces again. Then clean and grease everything else, as well as the crankshaft. Note that a BSA bearing has a right-hand thread on the left and a left-hand thread on the right, so it goes forwards out and backwards in. Then tighten again with the appropriate torque, 35 to 50 nanometers. You will need a Shimano TLFC 33 spanner or similar. Then push the right crank back in from the right and put the left crank back on. Make sure it is in the 180 degrees position, otherwise the pedaling will be out of round. Screw the crank bolt back in and tighten it only hand tight. Push the shim back in and then retighten the clamping screws to the correct torque, 12 to 14 nanometers. Then we turn our attention to the pedals. It is extremely unlikely that pedals crack when they are new, so we will only go into the correct assembly here. Pedals on bikes have a left hand and a right hand thread. Thankfully, these correspond to the side on which they are mounted, that is, left hand thread on the left and right hand thread on the right. If you can't remember righty-tighty lefty-loosey, the pedals are removed backwards and screwed in forwards. When fitting the pedals, make sure that the thread is clean, otherwise remove any dirt with a cloth and cleaner. Pedal axles are made of steel or titanium, so you can also use tougher cleaners or even a wire brush if necessary. Once they are clean, treat them with a suitable release agent to prevent the pedals from sticking if they are on the bike for a long time. If in doubt, apply sufficient grease or use assembly paste or copper paste for titanium axles. We won't go into the subject of contact corrosion cold welding explicitly here. Please also use the washers supplied with most pedals. For simple pedals without a round contact surface of the axle on the crank, please also fit washers. The edges of the pedal axle can damage the surface of the crank, causing corrosion and, in the long term, breakage of the crank. Then screw in the pedals loosely by hand. If this is difficult, the pedal may be tilted, the thread may not be correct, or you may have tried to screw in the wrong side after all. Now tighten to the appropriate torque. For most manufacturers, this is 30 to 35 nanometers. You can use a torque spanner and a suitable 6 or 8 mm socket spanner attachment if the pedal axle allows it. Or if there is only a mount for an open-end spanner, use a pedal spanner. Once you have identified the stem handlebar clamp as the source of the noise, use the torque spanner to tighten all bolts to the torque specified by the manufacturer, usually 5 nanometers. If simple tightening has not helped, dismantle the parts, clean everything, and use suitable release agents for the clamping surfaces and bolts. We also recommend carbon assembly paste for a combination of aluminium handlebars and aluminium stem, or on the steerer tube, as this increases friction instead of reducing it, as would be the case with grease, for example. You have a lot of leverage on these components. This prevents unintentional twisting of the parts in relation to each other when riding. As soon as one of the parts is made of carbon fiber, carbon assembly paste is mandatory. Grease or anti-seize has no place here. With these measures, you should have eliminated 95% of all noises. I hope we were able to help you with this video and would appreciate a thumbs up. Have fun gliding silently along on your bike.